Welcome back. Today I'm going to expand to some more other retro Fire Emblem. I'm really excited actually. It's all kind of the same composer actually with Yuka Tsujiyoko. And I'm just curious to hear more of her work. Been listening to so much from Fire Emblem 4 and I'm absolutely going to keep continuing that series until we're kind of out of good stuff. And I might do the same thing for Fire Emblem 3 and 2, depending on, how worthy people think those soundtracks are of being explored that deeply, or if there's other retro games that deserve to be explored like that are underrated, because I would love to do it. I really enjoy it. But this is a suggestion that sounded great from Fire Emblem Gaiden. Also haven't played any of them prior to 6. Anyways, this is the Ark of Dawn from Fire Emblem Gaiden. Really excited for this. I have no idea what to expect, but supposedly it shows, how much Yuka could get out of the, early sound on the NES, I believe. Let me double check. Is this indeed from the NES? Yes, from the Famicom. Very cool. Okay, so let's check this out. Let me rewind this a little bit and see what it is. Goddamn, like that sound. Like this kind of melody, obviously it's way earlier than it, but it reminds me a lot of like Twilight Princess melodies. Like the Midna's Lament and like Hylia. There's a few, maybe one other track that I'm forgetting, but there's a few from Twilight Princess that are just so iconic to me, with having this like ascending arpeggio in the bass and this kind of melody in the right hand. Obviously not like a particularly unusual construction, and clearly this is way earlier than that, and there's plenty of music written far earlier than this that does the same thing. But something about this chord is very similar to it. I think there's a reason why it's associated. In fact, I'll drop a little preview of those tracks I'm talking about. I think part of the reason is because it's that reminds me of that it states that left-hand arpeggio twice alone, and that's something that the Twilight Princess tracks often do, I think, is that they state that alone, so you get used to that arpeggio, and then it adds the melody. Again, not a rare thing, but it's distinctive when you bring these features together. It starts to be reminiscent of fewer and fewer works of music. So I don't know, it's a good association. I love that music. So it makes me think of it. And then, the melody evolves into something that's quite different than those tracks, but it still reminds me of it. And I love just the sound of these electronic, kind of chiptune sounds. I love it. I know it's always different than what you would hear on the original hardware going through a certain TV and their speakers. And you can look up different tracks from old games. They're going to sound different on YouTube. So it's not always like you're not necessarily hearing exactly what it would sound like. And in some ways there isn't and exactly what it sounded like anyways. Like, there is no original sound sometimes because it's so different based on like the TV somebody might have played it on. But there are ways the original hardware would render the sound, and even that's not always the same as you get from tracks that are, digital files now. Regardless, for whatever reason, I really like the timbre of this first retro sound in this arpeggio. It's just really great. I'm sold on one note. Like, I'm an easy sell with this kind of stuff. It just sounds great after one note. Also, that do still very similar to the Zelda, as you'll see with the clip that I put in. yeah. We'll keep going. I'll actually get through this. Brings in a third layer as well up higher already. Ooh, little parallel intervals. Yeah, that feels really French for a moment. The chord it kind of ends on there and lets sit. But yeah, really moves into parallel, maybe parallel thirds or sixths. I don't know. It's something very consonant. It's interesting because yeah, it brings in that third voice, which takes it immediately kind of out of the realm of the piece I was just talking about, into something that is less focused on just a simple left and right hand. And yeah, brings in that really high kind of quieter voice, and then after it kind of is doing something separate as like a counter melody, it then brings it in to do these consonant parallel intervals with the main treble voice, and really does that for a while, and then cadences on this chord that, again, like something about this process feels very French all of a sudden. It didn't before, and then it suddenly does. Suddenly sounds kind of Satie or Debussy. Da, da, da. Oh, did the arpeggio get longer? That would be really cool. Did it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, this is 6 notes. And what point does it change? Still 6. I'm totally wrong. What did I hear? I thought I heard something where it extended to like 8 notes, but it didn't. It's still 6. I don't know. Sometimes you just hear things wrong. Yeah, now it's changed the arpeggio. Instead of just going up, it's going do 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 do. So it's going back down during the arpeggio. So they did change it finally. I don't know where I was going with thinking I heard it shift to being more notes. Yeah, but it did change eventually. They shifted it from just a straight ascension to going up and back down. So it changes the feel a little bit. Got some octaves for a second. Back to more constant intervals. Yeah, totally changing the arpeggio to like 4-note kind of rising chordal shapes. So yeah, it's getting creative over time, changing up how the left hand works. Really good composition. Yeah, it just makes the rhythm feel different suddenly. Ooh, it gave it kind of syncopated feel. Yeah, it's doing a lot differently, like in terms of shifting how you perceive the meter, shifting the number of notes in each kind of, unit, musical unit, and then, changing up using this repetition of this 3-note pattern in the right hand, but the left hand has kind of shifted to 4-note patterns from 6 earlier, and then it takes this really constant regular rhythm and all of a sudden holds some to give it like this syncopated feel out of nowhere, which you really notice because of the context it's built of being so regular. Yeah, that held one for 2 beats just really works really well. Ooh, we get a ritardando. Yo, that happens so rarely. Like, it's not like some arcane thing to compose, but like you just do not hear a lot of, I think some of the Dragon Quest music, some of the Sugiyama stuff on the NES, I think some of it, maybe it's later than his work on the Famicom, but some of his 1 or 2 pieces notably have a bit of a ritardando, like a bit of a slow down and speed back up. But you don't hear it very often, especially in this context, in this era of game music. Honestly, you don't hear it often anyways. I'm a big fan of it. I like to have, a ritardando in part of a piece that I write. more so because I try to write from an improvisational standpoint of like many composers, that's where the best ideas arise, is when you're just improvising. Like your body and mind kind of do things a little bit more interesting creatively, subconsciously, when you're just going, and then you can, you know, look back, record it, and you know, write something from it later better than you might when you're just sitting down at the score writing or on a program. Works for me, and as the way of a lot of composers in history work, and lots do today. But where was I going with that? Right, with the ritardando. That part of the reason why I include that in stuff that I might write, especially piano pieces, is that, you know, I'm capturing the ideas improvisationally anyways. It's that approach to composition. And that usually comes with a lot of things you do organically, very naturally when performing music, that are more likely to come up in an organic context than in an inorganic context, when you're being prescriptive. So one of the things that happens quite organically for certain people, for sure, when playing music, certainly for me, is a little bit more flexibility in tempo. There's times where playing a certain thing, it just feels like a time to slow down or to speed up, which is a less common indication on a score. Less music wants to go to the lengths to specify too many tempo shifts, especially gradual ones of accelerandos and retardandos. Speeding up and slowing down gradually. It's not used that commonly, but when people play music organically, there is a lot of natural tempo shift. So that's part of why when you compose in that style and that process, you're more likely to end up wanting to include something like a ritardando in your piece, at least if you're somebody who has sort of the same motivations and workings that I do, which is certainly like an archetype of people. I'm not unique in any way. Again, I have the association of some Sugiyama early Dragon Quest, but really just one piece. If I can find what piece it is, I might put it in here, because I think that would be a really cool association to bring, to show like the one other thing I've heard of that I think fits. And yeah, just my own kind of story about like how that comes up compositionally for me and why I like it and why it shows up more. Anyways, let's keep going. Kind of sound like it slowed down the middle of that arpeggio too. And this could be a loop point, but I think it's before halfway in the time. Man, the bass is just so bold. I love the sound of it. It's really in the forefront. I love when bass is prominent, because it's so much of the musical meaning that's going on in any piece. And just got these three voices, which is kind of rare. There's usually two or maybe four. But it's kind of a trio. Yeah, here we go to these different groupings of notes, so it seems different rhythmically all of a sudden. Yeah, so this is a section that is like 4 against 3. We've got and we've got these 4-note patterns in the bass, and those don't line up perfectly, so they actually keep hitting like different verticals in terms of what's lining up with what. So it makes it really interesting, because you're hearing like a 4 against 3 where like the 3 isn't quite matching up with where the 4 is. Whereas before we were really just having like a static like 6 notes rising in the bass, and then the melody on top of it's kind of doing whatever it wants. It's very, you know, homophonic, like standard layering there. And then when it shifts here, all of a sudden you've got what... you know, I want to say it like makes an impression like a polyrhythm, but it's not. Like that's when there's different amounts of notes in the same amount of time. Like if you had 4 notes and 3 notes and they had to fit in the same amount of time. That's not what's happening here. Every note is the same value and every note's lining up with the other notes. But it just creates like there's moments where there's different notes that are combined each time because 3 and 4 do not line up perfectly. So it creates a cool effect. It means that it keeps sounding a little different. It hits you rhythmically differently because it keeps getting varied by the natural effects of combining those two numbers in their units. Yeah, it's kind of a cool like sort of shortcut to make something really interesting. Yeah, like there's a different note in this descending section of 3 in the upper voices. There's a different note that comes on the downbeat as far as the musical pattern. So you hear like an emphasis, but it's on a different one of those notes. Anyways, so it's like each time you kind of lean into the downbeat from that 4 section, you actually have kind of a different note happening in the upper section. And it makes it really satisfying because you keep feeling that downbeat, and it keeps feeling like it's a different feeling. And then that syncopated kind of like held note really plays into that well. Oh, wait a second. So that third voice is already there? I think I think on the second note, the duh, I think on that note, you hear the third voice very quietly. Yeah, the thing that's interesting to me here, and I don't know if anybody will know what I mean, but it was like hard for me to tell if that duh, duh, and on that second note, if that third high voice is there very quietly, or if it's more of kind of like an overtone from the wavelength of that sound. The third voice absolutely comes in at this point very soon in an obvious way, but it's almost like you can't tell if it's just this overtone, you know, kind of high ringing from the main melody note. So what I find really interesting is that it could even actually be that, and then that sound of that overtone is then turned into its own voice in this piece, which has happened. There's a part in Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto where you can kind of hear like the piano itself kind of plays like a ghost melody of the melody that's happening in the string section, because it's contained within the overtones of the notes and chords that are being played. So it sounds like it's there, even though it's not. It's actually pretty spooky. And when that's done intentionally, it's really wonderful. Like, it's so fascinating. And maybe that's reaching for like way too much to talk about here, but it's an interesting concept. I encourage somebody to look it up if you want to hear about something really fascinating. Overtones are always happening in music, but like it's rare that they're being like utilized compositionally, intentionally in this kind of way. And this is unlikely to be happening here. I think that third voice is just being brought in very quietly there. But the fact that it sounds like it might be an overtone that's then being adopted into an explicit voice in the piece is like, my mind really likes that idea and is like, if that's not what happened, I really wish that would happen somewhere, that a composer would do that, because that would be so freaking cool. Anyways, yeah, we've gotten to the fade out loop. Yeah, because the third voice is so high, it's like at first it's hard to tell if it started at that note or not. Anyways, let me go back to a screen that's nice to pause on here. Yeah, so that's my first thing I've heard from Fire Emblem 2. I think it was awesome. Like, I had a lot of associations with this to talk about. I'll drop some of them in if I remember to. Sorry if you watched this and I didn't. I don't always take notes because I don't want to interrupt my thought process while I'm recording live. But I'll try to add some. I think it would be cool. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more of all the early Fire Emblems, at least as far as people believe there's worthwhile music. This was a great track. I mean, I'm somebody who's like a big fan of like NES, and like early Game Boy music for like the Dragon Quest games, and this is very much that style. It reminds me a lot of some Koichi Sugiyama writing. It reminds me a lot of Koji Kondo writing. Not Uematsu. I feel like Uematsu is really kind of his own kind of thing. He's like oddly not very classical, even though people associate Uematsu so much with like classical game music, especially because of things like One Winged Angel. But I think that's more like Uematsu's like stab at doing something that sounds heavily classical. As a composer, I feel like he's actually kind of the odd one out who has less of a classical approach and background than a lot of the others. And it comes out in his music as being quite different, and is part of why a lot of his stuff supports a totally different vibe from a lot of the other like JRPG early music. Anyways, random thoughts. I also could be wrong about that. But that's sort of the impression I remember having. Always me with the disclaimers, but I like to make sure I point out when I don't know things, or I have an issue of I just naturally can talk, like I sound like I'm authoritative on something, or I can talk clearly and have ideas about things that are well formed. But that's just kind of how I am. It's kind of an accident. Like I can come off as maybe it seems like I think I know what I'm talking about a lot of things, when I really don't, and I know that I don't, and it's kind of a mistake for me to accidentally give that impression. So with a lot of things about context and composers and this sort of music, much of what I'm saying, I try to like have disclaimers about, like, this is what I think I remember, this is what seems to make sense to me, but I could be so off base, and really be incorrect about stuff. So we'll see. Maybe that'll be a engagement bait. People love the chance to correct somebody, and feel free to correct me about everything. I will see you soon in some more videos, hopefully some more retro Fire Emblem, probably some more Fire Emblem 4 in a video soon. Looking forward to doing that. Until then, have a great day. I'll see you next time.